IB Nation, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Kind of a special edition, Ryan, simply because it's preseason talk, or I should say Notre Dame preview talk, and we had to move our time up because Notre Dame was having a practice today that they changed the time on. So I've got to get done by around 2 o'clock or so to be able to get over to Notre Dame's practice. But we're going to continue our preview of the season, Ryan, and we'll have full-on predictions coming up tomorrow night. We're just going to kind of keep leading into these type of things. And today, Ryan, I wanted to give as honest of sort of a preview of this football team as possible as we kind of lead into our predictions, because our predictions tend to be like fun, right? Like this is what we think the team will be or should be. We do bold predictions, we kind of project a little bit. But what I want to do today is more of a, where they are right now, sort of analysis of this football team. And to talk about, what we know, what we don't know yet, what has to be proven during the season, some of the big surprises from fall camp. Look, nothing we're going to see today is going to surprise us. We've already seen a bunch of practices. They're just going to give us 5 minutes of walkthrough time. If they were going to do like a full practice availability today, I probably would have waited on today's show just to get a little bit more data, but we're going to see individual. And if you're on scholarship at Notre Dame and can't look good during individual, there's a problem. So we're going to talk about what we know and what we don't know, Ryan. We're going to start off with the offense, go to the defense, and even have a few comments about the special teams before we kind of wrap the show up with this conversation. If Notre Dame is a college football playoff team, and what we mean is a team that gets there and can do damage, not just gets there and gets their butts kicked, but like the team that we think they can be, can get to the playoff and be considered a contender for a championship, these will be the reasons. So a little bit of prediction involved, a little bit of projection involved. But also, if they fall short of expectations, this will be the reasons why. And what we're saying there is short of a championship, not like 7-5, 8-4. That's more of a disaster thing that we can't really project, in my opinion. Just more of if they don't quite live up to what we hope and think that they'll be, these will be the reasons why. So that's going to be our topic of conversation today, Ryan. And I want to start off with the offense because this is the side of the ball that people are freaking out the most about because of just the fact that as we tried to warn people, the offense is going to take more time to develop. It just is. We did the same thing with the offensive line last year. We told people it's going to take some time to get them going, and the offense is true so far. They did come out and have a nice Jersey scrimmage win. The feedback I've got about that so far has been very positive, but that's the side of the ball that I still think has the most to prove, Ryan, because it's the most faces, most new faces, transfers, guys that didn't play a lot last year. So I think that's the side of the ball where it makes most sense to start, because I think this, for me, Ryan, this is the side of the ball where we do still have the most unknowns about this football team.
I mean, it's really funny, isn't it, Brian? I mean, for the first time in a long time, I feel like Notre Dame is stockpiled with talent all over the offense, but it's the main question mark, and it's understandable because defense is a little bit more free flowing, right? Like guys can just make plays, they can kind of play outside of structure a little bit, and they can make their plays all over the place. Offense is much more dictated on people being in sync, doing your job consistently, and having a very consistent approach to the game. Running, aiming points well as a running back, offensive line staying in sync with the guy next to you, quarterback timing, wide receiver timing, and route precision. There's a lot of nuances to the offensive side of the football that takes it longer to mature compared to defense. I mean, if you have a Micah Parsons, for instance, right? You could just say, Micah, one player at middle linebacker, one player rushing off the edge, just go make a play, right, at the end of the day. So you could do those types of things. Offense always takes longer to mature, and that's just the simple fact of where we are with this offense. And I also think outside of, and I know we'll get into the quarterback conversation, this is still a very young in terms of age offense.
And
it really is
in some regards, yeah.
And a lot of it regarding experience. I mean, your top offensive playmakers are all juniors or lower for the most part, right? Your offensive line is buoyed by two excellent offensive tackles, but they're both juniors, right? Like they're both 20 years old.
Maybe? Those are your vets, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Like Zeke Correll is about to be a fifth-year senior. He's probably 22 years old, and people probably look at him like, wow, look at the old man in the room, right? It's like, it's so funny that this stockpile of offensive talent, but yet it is still a young offensive team, some in terms of age, some in terms of experience. But regardless, the building blocks are there, and it's exciting. And I think that when it all is said and done and it matters most, Notre Dame's offense is going to be very good during this
Yeah.
season. I'm excited about it, man. I'm really excited.
I'm not at the point where I'm worried about it because this
Yeah,
is kind of what we know. I've said this before preseason. First few days of practice, you think you can light the world on fire. By the middle of fall camp, you think you suck, can't beat anybody. By the end of fall camp, you kind of have an idea of who you are. And so we look at this football team on offense, Ryan, and let's first talk about the things that we do know about this offense, because a lot of things I'm excited about, you can't say are knowns, because here's what we don't mean by knowns. We're not referring to talent, right?
yeah,
You and I know this is a talented football team. That's more big picture, broad. We want to kind of zero in on more specifics. We know this team has playmaking potential. We know that they have talent. We know they have upside. We want to focus more on what is the knowns about it more specifically. And so that's kind of what we're going to dive into. So we want to really zero in on these aspects of the football team. And when you talk about the knowns, Ryan, the biggest known, obviously, and we could, I think we could easily go with quarterback, but for me, the biggest known that we have right now about Notre Dame is the offensive tackle position with Joe Alt
yes,
and Blake Fisher. The reason I go with the tackles first is because those are guys we've seen in a Notre Dame uniform. We know what the floor is for that group, and it's pretty good. Do we
yeah,
know if they're going to be the best tackle tandem in college football this year? No, we don't know the answer to that. Do we
sure,
think they're going to be one of the best? There's no doubt about it, based on
yeah,
just what we've seen. What we saw from that duo the second half of last season alone says they're going to be one of the 5 best tackle tandems. It requires Blake Fisher to take a jump for them to be the best. But
yep.
that's where the starting point goes right there, Ryan, is will they be the best? Not will they be good? That's established. The tackles will be pretty good this year, barring regression.
Well, yeah, I mean, we always talk about floor versus ceiling conversations, right? And I mean, the floor is if they are just what they were last year, then Blake Fisher's a good starting offensive lineman at Notre Dame, and Joe Alt's an All-American. Like that's got to if they're just as good as they were last year. Now, the hope is that Blake Fisher takes a massive step.
Right.
And obviously, there was a reshaping of the body that happened this offseason. Clearly, there were parts of Blake's game, maybe from a flexibility and foot quickness perspective, that he wanted to improve coming into 2023 season. I'm very hopeful for that maturation. And we also can't discount the fact that Joel is only entering his third year on a college system, his second
Yeah.
year as the full-time starter, third year as a starter, and he could still get a lot better. I mean, he's added significant amount of weight, I think like 7 or 8 pounds this
Yeah, he's up
offseason.
to
He's gotten
322.
stronger, he's getting more explosive. So just kind of seeing those things together, if Joe All takes a step forward and Blake Fisher takes a substantial step forward, then they have an opportunity to be the best offensive tackle duo in all of college football. They are in that possibility. That's the ceiling. The floor, though, they're one of the top 5 offensive tackle groups
Right.
in college football. I mean,
Right.
that's kind of where you are right now.
Right. Because with every team we talk about, Notre Dame, Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, everybody, it's okay, you can't have regression, right? But we can't spend an entire show talking about as long as there's no regression. So we'll say that kind of once up front. The tackle should be pretty good. There's no doubt about it. And that's a great place to begin, Ryan, because, as I've said this about Lou Emoji told me that Joe Moore would say when he was the coach here that the first thing his goal every offseason was to make sure he was set at tackle. That's where he began building his offensive line. Is, are we good at tackle? That was in an offense that didn't even throw the ball a lot, right? So, as in a more balanced offense, that's obviously something that we're going to be more comfortable with, obviously needing to be able to protect the quarterback so that there's even greater impact on that. So we did see that. I think you could even throw Zeke Correll into this conversation as well, Ryan, and just say we know that up the center, up the middle as well. But I think there's still some question marks that you and I have that we'll get into about how the guard position is going to impact Zeke. So that's why we're not really focusing on him just yet.
Sure.
Another known is we have to be able to put Sam Hartman in the known category because this is a kid that's thrown for 12,967 yards and 110 touchdowns in his career. We don't know what his numbers are specifically going to look like, but we've seen Sam Hartman play college football for 5 years now. We've seen him play against half the schedule that Notre Dame has faced this year. I believe he's played at some point in time in his career, a lot of them multiple times. We've seen him play in bowl games, ACC championship games. So it's a little different than like a Cameron Ward who transferred to Washington State last year. Really talented quarterback, but there was a jump he was making from levels, right? And, there might be a little bit more, well, we're not quite sure how he's going to adjust to that jump. And now I know that's a reason why you think Cameron Ward's going to be a lot better this year is because he now has that year under his belt. Sam Hartman's played against Clemson. He's played against NC State. He's played against a lot of the teams that Notre Dame's going to face this year.
He's played against Wake Forest's defense every day in practice.
There you
Yeah,
go.
exactly.
That's a great point. I wasn't even thinking about that. No one's
Yeah.
seen Wake Forest's defense more than Sam Hartman.
It's true.
So when you look at it, Ryan, there's a baseline there that we know about Sam Hartman. The fact that he emerged as one of 4 captains, to me, answered any remaining questions that we might have about his adjustment and ability to transition to Notre Dame. We'll find out what the production specifically is going to look like. But you made a great point, Ryan, when we were discussing how to go about having the Sam Hartman conversation, which was simply this. We know that the quarterback play at Notre Dame this year is going to be a lot better than it was last year. What that will mean numbers-wise remains to be seen. But the level of play, the quality of play, Ryan, is certainly going to be a major upgrade. And that is something we know, barring injury, about this football team.
I mean, I think Sam Hartman's going to be stellar this year. But yes, I mean, again, we're always pointing to the baseline of things, right? The floor of things. The floor is that Notre Dame won 2 games last year with a quarterback throwing below 100 yards. Like that happened last year, guys. They went 9-4 and beat a SEC team in a bowl game, scoring 40+ points in that game as well, by the way.
And gave
right?
up 2 pick sixes against that team, who beat Clemson and beat Tennessee convincingly, by the way. Notre Dame gave up 2 pick sixes and still won that game.
Yep. And one of them was in the end zone where they were about to score another time.
Yes.
So it would have been
to put the game
50
away.
points
Exactly.
in that game.
To
Yeah,
completely
exactly.
Put the game
So
away.
It's at worst going to be better than what it was last year. It has a chance to be excellent, though. It has a chance to be some of the best quarterbacking a Notre Dame team has seen in several years. Like that's how good Sam Hartman can be at Notre Dame. But at worst, I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves, does anyone expect the quarterback position to only be able to throw 85 yards against Clemson this year? Like that's not going to happen, right? It's not going to. A proven commodity, a player that has been there, done that, had some great numbers against most of these teams that he's playing this year as well.
Right.
The baseline is that the quarterback position is going to be very improved from what it was in 2022.
To your point, Ryan, let's give out some numbers, right? We like context. So here's passing yardage numbers that Notre Dame had in games last season. 85 in a win over Clemson, 116 in a win at Syracuse, who was ranked at the time, 150 in a win over Cal, 151 in the loss at Stanford. They had 156 in the win over Boston College, 177 in the loss to Ohio State. And then you look at Sam Hartman, and I don't believe he's ever thrown for less than 200 yards in a game. Actually, he did the opener of the 2021 season because they blew out Old Dominion so bad. He had fewer in that game. But Sam Hartman last season, his lowest total last season in the game, Ryan, I'm looking at this here, was 234 in a 10-point road win at Florida State.
Meanwhile, I think Notre Dame barely averaged 200 last year, right? Like it was like right around the 200 number. So,
correct.
Yeah.
So that was his. It was 207.1. That was his low last year. Previous season, Ryan, he had 213 in the ACC title game against Pitt. He had 188 in the opener, but he went 18 of 27 and had 3 touchdowns and a 42-10 win. So you're looking at it and you're saying, boy, this is a different animal, right? This is and we've seen a quarterback transition from a Power 5 team to Notre Dame before. And for us to make comments that this could be the best quarterback play they've had in a long time, y'all have to take that in consideration because these are 2 guys that were very high on what Jack Cohn did at Notre Dame 2 years ago, right? We were very high on what Jack did at Notre Dame 2 years ago. But this is just a different level, in my opinion, for what Notre Dame is going to be able to do. Another known, Ryan, to me is the running back position. And now some of you may say, well, hold on a second. Other than Audric, we don't really know. And my answer is I think that we do, because here's why I will say this one kind of breaks a little bit of the mold of what we're doing here. Because, A, you have an established starter. You don't have to use your depth a lot the way that Notre Dame has in the past. We saw that with Kyron Williams. I would like for them to. But running back is the one position, Ryan, where I care less about experience and more about the talent. And last year is a perfect example. You go into the season last year, and Audric Estime had what? I'm looking at it here, Ryan. I think he had 260 career rushing yards, correct, going into last year? 230, excuse me. And then Audric Estime had 60. So last year's duo at running back had 290 career rushing yards going into the season, and they rushed for over 1,700 by themselves, right? And over 2,000 when you put Chris Tyree in the conversation. if you have the ability, you have the ability. Now, the health of this group is a bit of a a question mark, but right now they're healthy, and we can't really control what will happen. They're healthy right now. When you have 5 guys with the talent level that this group has, I mean, we heard it in the spring in the scrimmage the other day. You started off with no Audric, just arrest him. I believe there was no issue there. Just arrest him because you already know who he is, right? Because he's such a known that you don't even play him in the scrimmage. Jadarian Price comes in early, gets some really positive carries. I don't believe he got hurt. My understanding is they just kind of limited his reps. They get all the way down to Jeremiah Love, and he's going off in the scrimmage, right? I mean, right now, Jeremiah Love is your number 5 running back. That's a top 100 recruit. So running back to me, Ryan, experience matters more at receiver than running back, and I still don't think experience matters a ton there to a degree. It doesn't matter like it does a quarterback, running back, or tight end, offensive line, D line, where you need a little bit more grown man strength, but also experience. Running back is just one of those, if you can play, you can play positions. It's one of the more instinctive positions in football, and that's part of the reason why. But also it's a position that relies on what's happening around you as well, and we expect the line to be good. So to me, I have a great deal of confidence that the play at running back this season is going to be very good. And the other part is, too, it's got the depth allows it to be more – the margin for error at running back is greater now than it's been in a long time because of that depth of talent, in my opinion.
Well, I would say this too, Brian, is that if this was just the running back room without Audric Estime, or say Audric Estime without the production that he saw last year, you would still feel good about the running back position because of all the talent they had. But again, if we focus on the baseline for a second, Audric Estime would have ran for 1,000 yards last year if he was the guy in the offense. Like, he would have been a 1,000-yard rusher. The fact that you have that guy as your number 1 runner and everything else just has to mix in and find its role behind him, I think that's really, really I think that's really why the proposition turns from very good, promising to very good to potentially excellent running back room. Like, I think that's potentially what you have here, because you do have a baseline of an Audric Estime. You know Audric Estime is going to be a good football player. We've seen it. We have seen it. How good or how impactful is Jeremiah Love going to be in 2023? It's a little bit of a question mark. Is Jadarian Price going to be able to stay healthy? Is Jabron Payne going to be able to stay healthy? But all those guys together, you have bodies behind it.
Right.
And with all that together, you're going to be able to find a high level of production behind Audric Estime. What exactly is it going to look like? Is there going to be a de facto number 2 back? How many running backs are going to play on a given Saturday? There's a lot of questions that come with the position, but I don't think there's really a question of, is it going to be productive or not? It's just a question of, what exactly is it going to look like? Like, is Jabron Payne going to be the de facto number 2 running back when it's all said and done? Is Jabron Payne going to carry that torch?
Is it going to be determined by the run scheme that they're going to use on a given week? Like, if this is a week where they're going to be duo inside zone, we might see a mess of Jabron Payne as number 2. If this is a week where they're going to be doing stretch and outside zone and counters, maybe we see more of Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love, or Devin Ford, who fits that style very well. We could see that as well.
Devin Ford.
Yeah, we could see that group as well, Ryan. And I mean, to your point, there could be 2 injuries to the position, and you still have as talented of a 3-man combo as most teams are going to have in the country this season, and that's something to certainly be excited about. Here's something that I feel confident about. It's not even a prediction; it's an expectation. I fully expect that the efficiency at the running back position to be greater this year. We saw that from Audric in the last 10 games. He averaged 6.6 yards per carry in the last 10 games of the season last year. That's not something that you go over a stretch of 3 or 4 games and it's inflated by that game against team A that stinks that you average 12 yards a carry against, right? It's not that. This is over a 10-game stretch that included the bowl game, Clemson, North Carolina, Cal, Syracuse, all those teams, right? USC, all those teams, 6.6 yards per carry, which is really impressive. Just for context, Ryan, because we like doing that here at Irish Breakdown. We like giving you some context. Josh Adams in his monster season in 2017 averaged 6.9 yards per carry. And he had more 50-plus yard touchdowns in one season that year than any Notre Dame player had in his career, according to the great Lou Emoji, right? And so, and Audric wasn't that far off from that, correct? So, and he doesn't have Josh's home run speed. I mean, I think his longest run was last year, 40-something yards.
Something like
right,
that,
where Josh had couple 80s, couple 70s.
Aldrich's a single and a doubles hitter, man. He's not a home run hitter.
But that's the point, though, right? To be at 5.9 yards per carry is really good for that type of runner. But to be at 6.6 over the course of a 10-game stretch is really efficient football for a kid that size. And if Notre Dame's pass game can support him, this is one of those what we don't know, as we'll get into. What we don't know is that. And here's the thing is, some comments in the chat just to make sure we're clear on what Marcus Freeman has said. Marcus Freeman has said this football team is always going to be a team that is going to run the football, and they want to be dominant running the football. What I think that often gets turned into is they're going to be run heavy. I've very specifically asked him this question when I had his one-on-one with him, and he made it clear. He's like, look, we're going to dominate running the football. We're going to run the ball when we want to run the football. But we're not going to be a team that just runs it just to say we're running it. If you want to put 8-9 guys in the box, and we're going to rip you up. So we may have a game where we only run for 150 yards, but we're going to average 6-something yards a carry because we kept pulling and just ripping you up because you kept giving us the stuff outside. Explain that very clearly. It's not about the volume; it's about the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the ability to force defenses to say, if you do not respect our run game, we will rip you up. If you're just going to play your base defense and play off and say we're going to not let this guy beat us on the perimeter, we're not going to let Sam Hartman beat us, fine, we'll run for 350 yards on you. It's really about kind of taking what the defense gives you to a degree, but more so being able to dictate to teams what they're going to do. And I think that the RPO aspect is another known. We're going to see more of that this year, and that's something that's going to provide a really nice balance with what they're doing in the run game.
Well, I think that those first two topics the last two topics we talked about, Brian, with the quarterback play and the running back play, those things are interaligned, right? Like they're aligned in a lot of ways because, I mean, for me, defenses have to treat the Notre Dame offense differently, but they can only do that if Sam Hartman is what we think he is, right? And if he's a known commodity, and I know that we both think that he is a known commodity, then the running backs will benefit from that, right? I mean, can you imagine? Because I think the craziest part about what Audric Estime did the last 10 games of the year, to your point, right, of the 6.6 yards per carry, is that he did it against some loaded boxes most of the time, man. Like there wasn't like a bunch of light boxes he was running into. With Sam Hartman as the quarterback and with a good offensive line and with improved playmakers outside, there should be some lighter boxes this year, right? Which only benefits what Estime and the running backs can do.
I don't know that we'll see that early. And we talked about this yesterday, Ryan. I do think teams are going to say, we're going to have to make you beat us with your pass catchers first, right? And because if you're Navy, for example, Ryan, you got to pick your poison, right? I mean, that's the reality is you can't stop both of what Notre Dame does. So you pick your poison. Well, right now, what's the thing you feel most confident in? And this is exactly what we're talking about. We just listed several things that we're confident about this season. One of them involved the pass game. That's the quarterback. The others were offensive line, running back, those type of things. And so I think teams are still going to say, hey, we know we're going to have to play you a little bit more straight up, but we're still going to be very run-oriented in how we're going to prepare for you on defense until you prove otherwise. And that's clearly something that they're going to have to show teams this year. Let's go to, Ryan, this next section is sort of our surprises in camp. And I think for me, the biggest surprise for me is at guard. And it's really a twofold thing. The one thing we just assumed was going to happen based on what we saw in the spring was that Billy Schroth was going to be starting left guard. And we were kind of, optimistic that there'd be a battle at right guard. And we wanted to see how Rocco Spindler was going to play. It was a complete reversal. I mean, by the third or fourth practice, it was Rocco Spindler at right guard, Pat Coogan at left guard, and it's kind of been that way ever since. That it surprises me that they settled on those. This isn't a statement of criticism, right? Because we got to see them play first. I have concerns based on what we know about certain players, but it's more of an observation. It's a surprise. If you would have told me before fall camp that within a week they'll have their starters determined, I probably would have told you it would be Kristofik and Schrouth. Maybe Rocco has a great start, and maybe Rocco takes that over, but I wouldn't have assumed it would have happened. So Rocco sees hold of that right guard spot really early, and Pat Coogan did the same thing at left guard, Ryan. And now I can say I'm concerned about it. I voiced yesterday how I would have handled it. It would have been differently. But the one thing you and I have always said is what you want to have as a football coach is you want to have guys seize hold of starting spots. And so far, that's exactly what Rocco and Pat Coogan have done at guard. Whether we agree or disagree with certain things left guard, that's not the point. We'll find that out. And I think we all hope that the decision is the right one and Pat Coogan goes out there and balls out. But you have to give props to Rocco and Pat Coogan for doing exactly what we say we always want to see. Hey, I'm the guy. I know this other guy's a good player, but I'm the guy. And in Joe Rudolph's eyes, they both did that and did it early in fall camp. That was a surprise to me, Ryan.
It was. I mean, Brian, honestly, I mean, we were talking about this not even, before the summer. We were talking about this in spring where we're like the first guys that we expect to get a crack at it are Billy Schrouth and Andrew Kristofic, right? Like those were the guys that we were talking about early in the spring. And then obviously Rocco takes a step forward at the end of the spring. So you're like, okay, this is going to get a little bit interesting moving forward here, right? Rocco's going to get a legitimate chance to start and to beat out Andrew Kristofic. And obviously that quickly happens in the fall camp. But nobody was talking about Pat Coogan. I mean, none of us. I mean, we weren't really talking about Pat Coogan. Nobody else was talking about Pat Coogan. Fans were talking about Pat Coogan. He was a guy that's just kind of been forgotten because
nice rotation guy at center guard. Yeah, that's it.
Exactly.
Good depth
He's been
guy.
a depth guy at Notre Dame, and that was kind of the perspective of what most people thought he was going to be at Notre Dame, right? And gave that kid all the credit in the world, right? Whether we agree with it or anybody else agrees or disagrees or whatever, the kid went out and he took advantage of his opportunity, right? And at the end of the day, I am very hopeful that he's going to be a good football player. I have my questions for sure. And at the end of the day here, and this would have been true even if Billy Schrouth was the starter, and let's say it was Schrouth and Rocco, neither one of those football players has ever started a game at Notre Dame. So it's going to be a concern or a question mark until we see them on the field.
Can I ask you this question, Ryan? And it's asking the question with the thought that I was having yesterday after the show. Does it give you a little bit? Because, like, for me, I have my opinion about, I'm concerned about this at left guard. I'm actually encouraged by the fact that Rocco so quickly beat out Andrew Kristofic, because you and I both like Andrew Kristofic, and we think he's a quality football player, and he's got 8 career starts. So if you come out, and this is what we said, if you beat out that kid, especially that early, that gives me signs that the light has gone on for Rocco, right? Sure, that's an encouraging thing. I haven't noticed Billy Schrouth in the practices we've seen playing poorly. So it's not like he's out there just getting his butt kicked all the time. Does it give you any sort of, for me it does, so I've been a little tempered in my criticism of it. If you'd have told me before fall camp started that Joe Rudolph's going to put Pat Coogan out there within the first week of fall camp and just ride him, I'd have gone off. And I still have some reservations. I would have gone off. Oh, this means he's not this, and I'm concerned about that, and he may not be the guy. But we didn't really have that conversation. So we've just kind of watched it evolve. And to me, it almost gives me a sense of I'm willing to wait and see because of how quickly he earned that job. And the fact that it's not like they didn't give Billy that shot in the spring. For whatever reason, they made the decision. We can agree to disagree with it. But I do have a little bit of a sense of it may be okay because of how quickly it happened. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question because I think there's layers to that question, right? Like, because my initial impulse is that they're playing it safe, right? That was kind of my initial impulse, and that the older guy, the veteran, the guy that has been in the program for longer, got the nod over the younger guy, right? Maybe the less known. But the more I think about it, this is Coach Rudolph's first year with the program, right? It's not like he's been around Pat Coogan for 3 years and he just knows Pat Coogan and that's just the guy he trusts. Pat Coogan had to earn his trust in a short amount of time, he got the same opportunities to earn his trust as Billy Schrouth did, right? As Andrew Kristofic did, as everybody else in the room. They have been with Coach Rudolph the same amount of time, which I think matters. That stuff matters as a first-year coach. So, yes, I am willing to sit back and watch it play out. At the end of the day, I think that Billy Schrouth is a more talented football player. There's no doubt about that.
Agree.
But we know the offensive line position isn't just about talent, right? I mean, there's a lot of really good offensive linemen that have played not only at Notre Dame, but everywhere, that when you looked at them, you're like, they're not the most physically impressive offensive linemen of all time, but they're really good football players because they understand how to attack leverage. They understand where to place their hands. They understand how to run their feet on contact and so on and so forth. I mean, I even think back to like Zach Martin has become the best guard in the NFL now, right? But he was playing out of position at tackle as far as his body length is concerned and the body profile that he brings to the game. But he was just so good, right? Like he's just such a good player at the end of the day. So I look past it and I'm willing to give it a chance because this isn't a situation where if Coach Rudolph had been at Notre Dame for 3 years and he's just been with Pat Coogan his entire time there, and he's been there longer with Pat than he has with Billy Shroud, I would second guess
Or
it
if
a
like
lot more and
Pat
be like,
transfer, or if Coogan transferred here from wherever Joe Rudolph was.
exactly,
Yeah.
like favoritism,
Yeah.
right? Like you would think it's a little bit of favoritism. But the fact that
Right.
these guys started on an even playing field and had to earn the respect and the trust of Coach Rudolph in such a short amount of time, I'm willing to let it play out. I hope he's right. I really do, man. I hope he's right because if Billy Shroud is a backup offensive lineman for this team this year, the dag, man. We're talking
Yeah.
about depth. Like that's
Yeah.
pretty dang exciting.
Well, another interesting tidbit to this whole thing, Ryan, is if you look at Pat Coogan's offer list coming out of high school, Joe
Yeah,
Rudolph never offered him a scholarship. He offered
it's
Billy
crazy.
Shroud. So it's not like some kid he fell in love with during his tenure at Wisconsin that he's carried over a favoritism. So clearly Pat showed him something. We'll find out if it was the right decision. Because I'm not making the case, oh, it's the right decision. We don't know.
Sure.
I have my doubts. But what gave me pause is just how quickly it all went down. It just gave me some pause.
Maybe Coach Rudolph's salty because Billy didn't choose Wisconsin. Maybe I'm
Maybe.
just kidding. Totally
I'm not gonna
kidding.
lie to you. The thought has crossed my mind, but it's when you first get that emotion from it. But I highly doubt a guy whose job is on the line is going to get that petty, about that kind of thing. So, and also he didn't pick Notre Dame until after Joe Rudolph was let go at Wisconsin, if I believe.
Fair.
So hopefully he doesn't have that. I highly doubt he would. And I know Ryan's just kind of messing around. Another surprise in fall camp, Ryan, to me, is how quickly Chris Tyree established himself as sort of a, a, a receiver, really, but a guy that Sam Hartman looks to a lot. Everybody keeps talking about, oh, there's no established guy. Well, if you watch the practices that I've seen, we've talked about this on shows. It looks like Sam Hartman likes to look for Chris Tyree a lot, and it looks like Jared Parker likes to design a lot of different things for Chris Tyree to get the football. I have to say that I expect Chris Tyree to be a complimentary player. I still kind of expect that. But a year ago, Ryan, I was saying I don't think he can move to receiver. I don't.
Right.
I don't think a receiver works. I don't think he catches the ball like a receiver. Watching him in the last couple of weeks, just running, even going through drills, Ryan, he's running like a little quick post, and the ball's thrown like 100 miles an hour, like about a foot above his head, which may not seem like an easy throw, but like a quick post, I'm talking like that's slightly past a slant. The ball's thrown with heat and high, and he's gets his arms up there, snatches it like it's nothing.
Especially
Those
as a
aren't throws I thought
shorter wide
right,
receiver. He's only 5'9",
right,
right?
with shorter
Exactly.
arms.
Yeah.
I didn't think he could be a full-time. I thought he'd be like kind of like a gimmick receiver, catch some screens, some crossers. That's all I thought Chris Tyree could be. And so far, he's proven himself to be much more than that. And that's a bit of a surprise out of fall camp for me, Ryan, is just how quickly he's gotten used to playing that position and become a guy that the quarterbacks clearly depend on.
The journey of Chris Tyree this offseason has been fascinating, man. I remember when he got moved to wide receiver, I was like, that's not going to work out. Like, that's literally my first impulse. I'm like, I don't see that fitting, right? And then you hear it's going well. You're like, okay, maybe he could be a really nice gadget player, right? Get some reverses, get some jet sweeps, catch some screens, do that type of stuff,
Some
right?
crossing
Like, cool.
routes, the
Yeah.
occasional quick out cut, just the simple stuff that doesn't require a lot of knowledge of playing wide receiver.
Easy space stuff, right?
Yeah.
Just trying to get that kid in space and letting him work. And then the more you hear about it, you're hearing him winning down the football field, creating big plays, running seams, like all this different stuff that's not very easy for a 5'9", 192-pound player. Like it's just not. So
Who's been playing running back his whole life, right?
so
Like
he's gone
that's
from a forgotten running back this offseason to a gimmick wide receiver kick returner to potentially being a difference maker at wide receiver.
focal
Like,
point of the offense,
yeah.
right? Right.
It's
Now
been
we'll
the
see if it
bad-
plays out that way, but that is certainly something that has surprised me in fall camp so far. Those are really for me it. I think you could say that Holden Stace has been a little bit of a surprise for me. Not, but I don't want to kind of go full because I always love the talent. I mean, it just was like, when's it going to happen? So I hesitate. I originally had him down as sort of one of my surprises of fall camp, but it was more surprise because I thought he might need a little bit more time to be that guy, and he still might be. We need to see when games start, but I've been really impressed with just the ease with which he goes about his business on a daily basis. He really does.
Sure.
And if he keeps doing what he's doing, it's going to make Mitchell Evans better too, because Mitchell wants to be that guy as well. And so that battle, I mean, competition, if it's done the right way, makes everybody in that competition better. And I think we're seeing that at tight end. I do.
Yeah. Well, I think we need it too. I mean, because there are obviously some injury question marks that have arisen. I mean, even with even before the Kevin Bauman injury, I mean, you're still dealing with Eli Raritan getting back at some point. Hopefully during the season, and you're down to depth of right now. It's Mitchell Evans, Holden Stace, and you have the former walk-on. His name always escapes
David
me.
Sherwood.
I apologize. David Sherwood, who caught that really nice in cut during the Blue Gold game. Like, he's a good football player. But at the end of the day, you expect Mitchell Evans and Holden Stace to be the guys because they are the pure scholarship players that have been on scholarship their entire time at Notre Dame and have a lot of talent. So seeing Holden Stace, who also brings a different variable to the football field that I think you don't have enough of that are healthy right now. And that's the guys that can line up a little bit everywhere, right? And bring some pass game upside. So it's been awesome to see his maturation this offseason. And Notre Dame's going to need him, man. They're going to need him because I really like Mitchell Evans as a football player, but there's just some things, in my opinion, that Holden Stace can bring to the field that Mitchell Evans doesn't really bring in its entirety. So I'm excited to see how big of an impact he can have this season.
Let's dive into the biggest questions that we have, Ryan. And so you understand the premise of this conversation.
Yep.
Question, and this is a comment that I made on the message board. Somebody said that that every team has weak spots. And the point he was making is because we don't know a lot about the guard, he called it a weak spot. And my whole thing is something being a question or a concern doesn't make it a weakness. It means it's an unproven aspect of your football team. Could end up being a weakness, could end up being a strength. We don't know. I remember us talking about, I was at the time covering Notre Dame and going into the 2015 season. I was at Blue and Gold and we were doing shows, and Lou and I were talking about shows. And if you remember kind of looking back at the 2014 season and what the biggest question marks were what I felt it was receiver was a big question mark going into 2014. As if you remember the 2013 season, Ryan, you lost TJ Jones of the NFL. You lost Troy Nicholas of the NFL. And then you had DeVaris Daniels got suspended. He was supposed to be sort of your go-to guy in 2014, but he got suspended. So you're going into the season where Chris Brown is your leading pass catcher from the previous season, and he had 15 catches. Will Fuller and Corey Robinson combined for 15 catches that previous season. CJ Prosise only had 7 catches the previous season. And because you had lost your top pass catchers. And then going fast forward to 2014, Will Fuller goes from 6 catches to 76, 161 yards to 1,094, 1 touchdown to 15. Chris Brown also jumps from 15 catches to 39, from 200 yards to 548. Corey Robinson goes from 9 catches to 40, about 150 yards to 539. CJ Prosise goes from 7 catches for about 72 yards to 29 catches for 516 yards. And then Emil Carlisle goes from being a running back the year before, who caught 7 passes for 30 yards. He goes out in 2014 and he catches 23 passes for 309 yards as a receiver. So, but you can look back hindsight 2020 and say, receiver was not a question mark going into 2014. It absolutely was, right? It absolutely was. A question mark going into 2015 was what happens if Malik gets hurt? Deshaun Kaiser was coming off of a brutal spring. He was a redshirt freshman. He had never played a snap of college football. If Malik goes down, it's him and Brandon Wimbush, who's a true freshman. That's it. Sound familiar? Right? So it's more of an unknown than a weakness. We won't know if anything is a weakness until we see them play football games. But as we said before, Ryan, the biggest question mark for me or at this point in time is the receiver and the guard play. And we'll just briefly touch on guard because we already talked a lot about it. But everything we said about the guard position before is where we stand. It's a question mark. We don't know how it's going to be. We're encouraged by how quickly certain guys won jobs, but now we need to see them play. And then if they don't play well, how does that impact Zeke Correll? That's a question too. So you and I, Ryan and I believe this very strongly. If you're not good up the middle on your offensive line, you're not going to have a great offensive line. I don't care how good your tackles are. So to me, that's still a question mark that we're going to have to see answered. But we did talk a lot about that position and the concerns that we have and the things that we like. Receiver's the big one, though, Ryan. And when I say it's a question mark, it's not. I'm not as concerned as a lot of the people in the chat are. Because of whatever they're hearing in practice sports. I don't really care about that stuff. Are they competing? Are they learning the offense? Are they getting down timing with the quarterback? That's the stuff I care about, not whether they won this rep or this drill or that drill, right? I understand what the purpose of practice is, and it's not always going to be that, right? Yep. Ryan, you've played football. There's times where one side of the ball struggles in camp. They turn out to be really good in the season because it's just part of the building process. I remember us being really concerned about the Notre Dame front seven in 2017 because we watched the Notre Dame offense rip off 50-yard run after 50-yard run after 50-yard run. And I remember Mike Elko saying before the season, like, yeah, we're actually not that bad. We're okay. It's just that group right there is really freaking good. He called them human lie detectors. Well, come to find out, that front seven in 2017 was pretty good.
Yeah.
And it really was that offensive line was that good. But the question is it just because they're going against really good corners? Are they still struggling? Are they comfortable? To me, you look at a guy like Tobias Merriweather, I still have my expectations have not changed, but this is a guy with just one career catch. We've got to see him prove it in games. Jaden Thomas is a guy that's a known commodity as a slot. He's not a known commodity as an outside guy. And now that's pretty much all he's playing this season. We didn't see Deion Colsey take that step in practice. Will that change by the time we get to the season? I don't know. Is he just going to be a rotation guy like he was last year and a quality rotation guy, made some big catches down the stretch, or does he take that step? What's Jaden Greathouse going to be? It's been great in practice so far, but what's he going to be like in game? So I still have all the confidence I had in this unit before the season started. I still have. It's just they need to go prove it now. And until they do, I don't care what they did in fall camp. If they had a great fall camp so far, Ryan, I'd be saying the same thing because it doesn't matter about practice as much. Practice is about getting the timing down, learning it, competition, getting your conditioning level correct, getting on the same page. It's not so much about we won X number of scrimmages or we won X number of one-on-ones. This receiving core, no matter what's happening in fall camp, now gets an opportunity over the next 2 weeks to grow and build and be ready to go make plays in the season. If they do, this offense is going to be special. If they don't, this could still be a pretty good offense. It just won't be that big time, maybe championship level offense that we hope it can be. And so until they prove it, the receiving core to me, and you could even throw a tight end in there from a pass catching standpoint because they only have like 5 career catches right now at tight end coming back next year, right? 4 from Holden Stace, 4 from Mitchell Evans, 1 from Holden Stace.
Yeah.
The pass catching aspect of it to me is still the biggest unknown, and which makes it the biggest concern for me.
It's going to be super interesting because I know people are stargazers out there, right? Where you look and you say, "Well, wide receiver room is littered with former 4-star players, right? Like high impact players, right?" So the talent's there clearly, but you're in a state of maturation where you don't know exactly what you have, right? Like, that when I walk past Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colsey just on the hoof, you're like, that guy's an impressive looking athlete, right? They're impressive. You walk by guys like Braylon James, that's an impressive looking athlete. You walk past Jaden Greathouse, you're like, that is a big, strong wide receiver. You walk past Jaden Thomas, you're like, that kid's 6'1.5", 220 pounds. Like, that's wild. They look the parts. Unfortunately, for some of them, they are behind the 8 ball a little bit because the previous staff did not develop wide receivers well enough to what they needed to. Now, I have great trust in Chancey Stuckey that he's getting it turned around because we saw growth last season. We're seeing growth on the recruiting trail. I think this position is going to go in a great direction, but you're talking about a lot of juniors, a lot of sophomores, and a lot of freshmen that are going to be contributing, right? And there's a lot of unproven production up to this point. So the baseline is lower because you don't have a lot of proven production coming back. The ceiling is extraordinarily high, though.
Right.
If you just have 3 guys in that room take massive steps, right? See, Jane Thomas takes a step forward, Tobias Merriweather, and whoever else, Chris Tyree or Jaden Greathouse or whoever, then it's going to be a potent wide receiver room and probably the best that we've seen in several years. Or it's still developing, right? And so like it's a little bit in between because the one the one thing I'm worried about slightly is that you have a 60-year quarterback who's only going to be here for 1 year. His window for production and to being a winner at Notre Dame is right now. It's now or never. Wide receiver room, all these guys can come back again. Every single one of them. It's not now or never for Deion Colsey. It's not now or never for Jaden Greathouse. It's not now or never for Tobias Merriweather. They
Right.
still have time if 2023 isn't the now. So are those windows going to align? Is the only major question mark I have. I think they can, and I'm very hopeful that they will. But until it happens, it's a question mark until we see it
Right.
for sure.
And if it happens this year, when? Is it game 2? Is it game 1? Is it game 3? Is it game 5? Is it game 9? Like, when does the light go on? What you can't have is you can't have them play as poorly as they did early last season, because that'll get you beat in game 3. If you play as bad against NC State as you played against Cal in game 3 last year, you're getting beat. Unless your defense just holds them to like 10 points, right? You're getting beat. So that's the part we need to see. Now, I'm confident that we feel like the baseline now is higher than it was a year ago, simply because we've seen these guys play, Ryan. Like, we've seen them all play.
Yep.
And so we'll see. But that to me is one of the big question marks that I look at. We've talked about the guard position. And then the final question mark to me, Ryan, is, you could talk about backup quarterback. That's a bit of a question mark. But that's a question mark with most teams. Most teams aren't established at best. The backup quarterback position. I think probably Ole Miss is about the only team that I can look at and say they're going to have a dude with a lot of playing time sitting on the bench, right? I mean, someone with a lot of starting time sitting on the bench because they have Jackson Dart and Spencer Sanders. But the big one for me is just it's Jared Parker. It's the biggest unknown of what we know. Like, we've seen these receivers play, right? We've seen them play football. We've seen Chris Tyree have a 100-yard receiving game. This is what some people forget. The leading returning all career pass catcher and yardage player in receiving for Notre Dame in 2023 is Chris Tyree, not Jaden Thomas, not Deion Colsey, not Tobias Merriweather. It's Chris Tyree. Chris Tyree has a 100-yard receiving game under his belt. He has 2 50-plus yard receiving touchdowns in his career. He had the one against Oklahoma State and then the one against Toledo in 2021. So but we've seen him play is the point. We don't know what Jared Parker is going to do as an offensive coordinator. I'm actually optimistic, Ryan. I am. But again, right now I think based on this data point, this conversation, what I'm seeing from here, the talent level, I can put those things together and put the pieces to the puzzle together and say, I feel confident that this offense is going to be run well from a coaching standpoint this year. But it's still a guess.
Sure.
It's still a guess until we see it happen. And so that's what a lot of this is about, Ryan. It's what are the knowns versus the unknowns. I know Jared Parker's a pretty good tight ends coach. I know he has experience being a pretty good wide receivers coach. I know that he's worked in this system with this coach and done these type of things. What I don't know is what he is going to be like as the guy in charge. We're going to find that out this season. As I said, I'm actually optimistic about it, Ryan. But until we see him do it, you have to call it one of the big unknowns that we have on defense right now, or on this football team right now.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, because you can be as hopeful as you want, but the only data point you can look at is his brief time at West Virginia, which is an imperfect data points, because we know that Neil Brown had his control over that offense. So that is not a real data point. It's not. I mean, it's so funny. I see people kind of point to that all the time. Both Notre Dame fans and non-Notre Dame fans have oh man, Jared, look what he did at West Virginia. I'm like, guys, he didn't call the plays for the most part. It wasn't his responsibility, unfortunately, for him. So it's an imperfect data points. This is, in my opinion, Jared Parker's first real opportunity to call plays where he is the guy and that it is his offense and it is his butt on the line and everything in between that you would want for an offensive play caller. So I am very optimistic. I think that from conversations I know that you've had with him, from things that you've heard, I know that he's a bright guy, and I know that he believes in certain things that I think are principles that can win at Notre Dame. There's no doubt about it. And there's been some things I've heard from him in the spring that make me pretty optimistic with some things that I'm hearing, right? So it's a question until it's not a question. But I am optimistic. I just
Yeah.
need to see what it looks like.
Well, and here's the one thing we do know about his time at West Virginia, because you've rightly pointed out, Ryan, that he had a very limited control over what West Virginia did when he was there. And when you look at that West Virginia offense, it was an offense that finished 86th in that season in total offense. Clearly not a wonderful performance by that offense. They finished 88th in scoring offense. What he was responsible for was calling plays in the red zone. That was his job. They finished that year 19th in the country in red zone offense. They were like 30 something in red zone touchdown percentage. When you look at the year before he got there and you look at where West Virginia ranked, they ranked 118th. In 2 years, he took them from the 118th red zone offense to the 19th red zone offense, because that was his baby from what we were told, right? And so that's the only thing we know. But to be a great coordinator, you got to get into the red zone first, right? Like, if you can't do things to get you into the red zone, it doesn't matter that you're a great red zone designer and play caller, right? You've got to do the things to get your group into the red zone, and that's something that we'll have to learn. But, yes, optimistic, but when you're looking at it just for what it is, it's a question mark. And then, of course, there's the question mark of how will the staff gel together? How will Joe Rudolph do? Will him and Gino Guidugli mesh well with Jared Parker because they have coordinator experiences? It can go one of two ways, right? It could be great because he can lean on these experienced guys that have done this and done that, or they can kind of be like, well, I would do it this way, or I would do it that way. And then there's that butting of heads where there's never that acceptance of him being the guy. That's the two ways it could go. And then, primarily from what we've heard, it's gone well. But until we see it in action, that it goes well until like that first time in a game where, there's a disagreement on what you would do in this situation, then it all falls apart. That it can go like that too. So it's just another layer of what we don't know about this football team, but we'll learn it quickly, because when you play what Navy does in week one, with their defensive coordinator, former head coach or former defensive coordinator, now the head coach, he wants to bring pressure. They're going to blitz from all over. It's tons of different angles. Tony Gibson's going to do the same thing in week 3. Ohio State's going to bring pressure from all over in week 5. You're going to find out very early what this offensive staff is made of, Ryan. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be very telling very quickly. I mean, you're going to have a couple warm-up games to begin there, but then you play against the Tony Gibson defense that let up less than 20 points per game last year and is historically a very good defense. And also bring back 2 very good cornerbacks, and they bring back a couple versatile linebackers in Peyton Wilson, where pressure is going to be a thing that they're definitely going to lean on. There's no question. So you're going to have to – it's going to be a little bit of baptism by fire the first 5 games of the week, because you're going to play against some aggressive style defensive coordinators. And if you don't have your ducks in a row and everything ready to go and adjustments kind of in your mind and at hand, I think that Notre Dame is it's going to be in a little bit of trouble. But I think that they're going to be in a good spot, but they're certainly going to get tested. There's no question about that.
Let's move over to the defense, Ryan, and talk about the things we know and don't know and the surprises on defense. And when you look at this side of the ball, this is the side that's really been the most impressive in fall camp. And I would say this, even with the standpoint of you always expect the defense to be ahead, I'm still even more impressed with his defense with that. And also, Ryan, you and I have been talking about this all summer. I know I've been talking about this a lot with Vince. This defense is going to be better than a lot of fans think. A, it was better than a lot of fans think already. B, you're going to see natural improvement in year 2, especially when you have so many guys coming back with a lot of experience. And then you added 3 very important transfers, 2 of which have a chance to be starters this year. And you have some position moves that are getting guys into better spots. And so you look at this team, I expected them to be better. They've been better than I expected. And so this side of the ball is something that I'm very curious to see. Is it the offense is just struggling that much that's making the defense look better? Or is this unit really ready to take that big jump and get back on track as being really one of the best defenses in college football? We're going to find that out. But I'm very encouraged by what I saw. It's a lot of depth on this defense, a lot of speed on this defense at all layers. They play with a lot of attitude. I mean, a lot of attitude. And their coaches kind of facilitate that. Have you ever seen Mike Mickens get interviewed? He's very calm and cool and a smart guy. And he, likes to give sort of like the thoughtful responses and doesn't want to give you too much. And you watch him at practice and you're like, that's an intense dude. That is not the guy we see at press conferences. And I kind of like guys like that, right? Like, he knows how to put on the, hey, we're all good. We're just working hard. And we're just trying to do the best we can. Kind of puts on that folksy type of thing. And then you get at practice and it's like that guy gets after it, right? He is coaching the heck out of these guys. And his players take on that mentality. And then you watch the defensive line, and Al Washington is a guy that caught a lot of heat this offseason and last year, and part of it justified. We've given him some. But you watch him coach this year, and you're seeing a guy that's very much got command of his room. But more importantly, unlike last year, you're seeing a room that's taking on his personality. Al Washington is I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. He's very intense. And he is a barely 6 foot tall defensive lineman that played Power 5 football. He was like 200, which means he's always been undersized. He's always been counted out. He's always been told, you're not good enough to be here. He's coached at lower levels and had to work his way up. He's got a chip on his shoulder. And it's not a bad thing. And you know what his defensive line plays like? An intense guy with a chip on his shoulder. That's exactly how they've been all spring. They didn't take on his personality last year, Ryan. There's no doubt. There's no doubt they've taken on his personality this year. And those are some of the observations I've seen about this football team. So those are some of the things that we know about it from a big picture standpoint. But let's get into some more specifics and get into the nitty-gritty about what we know about this football team. It's kind of like tackle on offense, Ryan. Corner. Like, we know this cornerback room is going to be even better because you got everybody back on the outside from last year. And your reinforcements have arrived in the form of your 2 fastest corners now, in Christian Gray and Micah Bell. That's your newcomers. You did lose Tariq Bracy in the slot, had a great year last year, and you've replaced him with a guy in Thomas Harper who might have even been even better on film last year than Tariq was, in my opinion, because he's just got some size and some different things he can do. And so you say your strength from last year just got stronger going into the season. So cornerback is number one, the thing that we know. It is long, it is athletic, it is experienced now, and it is talented to the point where a guy that 2 years ago was starting for Notre Dame 3 years ago on a playoff team is now at best your 4th corner. That's where they're at right now.
It's a crazy amount of depth that's been created in that cornerback room. I feel like we hyper-focus on wide receivers so much because it's been such a quick fix that's happened over the last couple of years. But cornerback has been one of those ones that Coach Mickens has just done this in about 3 to 4 years now, where you're like, he is steadily improved this cornerback room greatly. I mean, Brian, like, we talk about, who's going to be the best cornerback duo in college football. And I think we both agree that it can be Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart if they have the seasons that we think that they can have. Regardless, though, there have been some years where Notre Dame cornerbacks, I look at them and I'm just like, they don't look the parts, right, all the time. I think back to like 2020 where you had to go and get Nick McLeod just because you were desperate for cornerbacks. Like, you were desperate. And no shot at Nick McLeod. Nick McLeod ended up being a good player at Notre Dame, but
they don't make the playoff if Nick McLeod doesn't transfer to Notre Dame in 2020.
Yeah.
But the point you're making, if I'm correct, is you shouldn't have to rely on a guy like Nick McLeod to come in and save your season from a cornerback standpoint, correct?
Yeah. It's almost a move of desperation to a degree, right? Because you needed him to play. Like, there was no just bring in I'll coin it to like Antonio Carter at the safety position, right? You brought in Antonio Carter to strengthen the depth and to compete. Like, that was the biggest thing, right? But Nick McLeod was going to start if he came to Notre Dame. Like, everyone knew that. Like, he's going to start. He's going to come in because he needs to play, because you don't have a lot of viable options that are on the roster right now. At Notre Dame right now, I look to one side, I see a freshman All-American from last year, a kid that had 6 interceptions, Benjamin Morrison, and probably going to be a first-round pick next year. Like, that's probably what the track that he's on right now. On the other side, you have a corner who just made the Feldman's freak list for 2 straight years that is right around 6'3", just about, runs in the 4.4s, explosive athlete, former wide receiver as well. Your 2 starting corners look the parts. And then behind him, guess what? You have a kid that's a legit 4.3 athlete. You have Christian Gray, who came in, who's been a freshman sensation in the spring and the
From what
fall when
we've
he's
seen,
been healthy. Yeah. And he is the slower of the two freshman corners, and he was verified at 4.41 last year.
Yes.
Like, what, man? What?
Yeah.
So the depth, and that's not even counting Jaden Mickey. That's not even counting a couple of the
Who's
other
had a very good spring and fall camp. Correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches, man. They have depth at corner, the most they've had in some time. Like, I can't remember the last time they had this much depth at corner. I really can't.
You talked about the freaks list. Cam Hart what was he the year before? Like he was in like the 80s, I think the year before.
He was 38 the year before and 32 this year.
So then he jumped up to 32. Yep. I'm reading the report that you had from Bruce Feldman. He said he hit 23.01 miles per hour on the GPS, which was up from the 21.7 he ran from the year before. So it's like a mile and a half per hour faster. And it tracks with what we've been reporting about what he's done this offseason, Ryan. You look at the 505-pound squat. That's really bad. That's really like impressive for a kid that size. And then 40 pull-ups. They like Notre Dame was giving this weird pull-up data, right? But 40 pull-ups for a guy that long is impressive. But what we've reported is that, Cam has been putting in the work this offseason. He's really been getting after it. He's got a lot to prove. He's bigger and stronger and all those kind of things. Well, those numbers support that he has gotten faster. But here's the thing. He was already one of their fastest players. Like 23 miles an hour on the GPS thing is moving. Just for context purposes, Ryan, Chris Tyree was on the freaks list 2 years ago in 2021. And we all knew how fast he was. Feldman reported at the time that Chris Tyree's max speed on that was 22.3.
Yeah.
Cam Hart's was 23.01. Now the question is,
man,
he's got to stay healthy, right, Ryan? Like that's going to be the big key. But that's you're dealing with a great foundation to start on. Here's another thing that we know, and this is going to be the one that gets disagreed upon. We're not getting into it today. You guys can say what you want to say. There's no doubt that we know what the linebackers are going to do this year from a floor standpoint. And it's really just look at the last 6 games of the season. And I would even say you could narrow it down to 2 of the 3 linebackers. We know what Jack Kaiser and J.D. Bertrand are going to be. Maris Luafau, to me, is still a question mark. He is. But the reality is the arrival of Thomas Harper means you don't have to play Maris unless he does get better. Because if he doesn't, you just make the move and you put Jack Kaiser there, which they've already done. And I would argue this, the linebacking core looks so much better this year now that you've got 2 straight recruiting classes on campus, because you add Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury to that group, and Preston Zinter even to a degree, but you add those 2 guys right there, Ryan, and all of a sudden you just added your 2 freakiest athletes and 2 of your 3 freakiest athletes at that position in those 2 guys. So yeah, that the linebacking core to me is a no. Now, the floor wise, how good will it be? That remains to be seen. But from a floor standpoint, we know.
Well, and the floor's been risen because of the young linebackers on this group right now, right? And I mean, it's funny to say that, but like there has just been such an increase of depth of talent over the last couple of years in recruiting, and we knew that this was coming, right? I mean, when you stack classes of Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler and Joshua Burnham and Junior Tuilamaka, and then roll into Drake Bowen and Preston Zinter and Jaden Osbury, and then now into the 2024 class, like you knew that this was going to happen. At some point, you're going to be like, wow, the linebacker room looks different than what it used to look like. It does. Yeah. So I think that's where the floor is getting risen, is the fact that you have numbers, right? Like depth can raise the floor of a team as well. And I think that depth, it's just like, I always talk about
knowledge
the law of
in
averages,
the system,
right?
Can too, Ryan. That's the other part of it. So can knowledge in the system.
You have a couple linebackers that are known commodities at this point. You talk about what J.D. Bertrand is, you talk about Jack Kaiser is. If they're just as good as they were last year, then they're good players, and that will help your floor as well. But the other group, whether it's Marist or it's not Marist, you have other options that are on the table. And the fact that you have that, law of averages say that 1 out of X amount of those players are going to hit, right? 2 out of X amount of players theirs are going to hit. So I feel comfortable with where the linebackers are. I feel good about the floor because they have seriously improve the depth and the talent of depth at the linebacker position?
When I look at the knowns also, Ryan, it ties into this position to a degree, and that is the coaching aspect of it. So when you look at this group, you look at the coaching staff, and look, there are certain things we don't know, Ryan. There's certain things we got to find out, how much better they're going to be, different things along those lines. But here's what we do know. We do know that the entire coaching staff is coming back. We do know how the defense played in the second half of the season. We've broken down those numbers. We've talked about the linebacker production numbers. We've talked about the overall the play of the defense in the final 6 games of the season, with USC being a bit of an anomaly during that kind of stretch. We know what teams tend to do when they get second seasons in a system. We see it all the time where teams make jumps in those regard. There's a lot of when you talk about the ceiling, Ryan, that's rarely a known. The ceiling
Right.
of a team is rarely known going into a season. But when you talk about the floor, when you talk about what we know what Al Golden wants to do. He now has a second year of experience. We've seen him make the adjustments. We've seen him drop some stuff from last year to this year. We've seen him add some wrinkles from last year to this year now that he knows the players better. And I from what I've seen, the combination of him and Max Bulla working together for whatever reason is clicking. It works. And we're seeing this group now having better talent helps, right? Getting Drake and Jaden and all that. But it really, you just watch JD and Jack and even Maris to a degree, who again with Maris, it's like, I just need to see it to believe it. But I can't deny some of the things I've seen in practice where he just looks like he knows what he's doing more
Yeah.
so than he did in the past. That's a known to me. It's the opposite of the offense. We don't know what the offense is going to do. We know what this defensive staff can do. And it's a staff that, even with all the issues we had last year, held Ohio State to 21 points, held Clemson to 14 points, held Marshall to 19 points, held Stanford to 16 points, and did what it did last season. And you can't deny that. Now it's like, okay, now take that jump. That's what we need to see. But you have to go into the season feeling like there's a pretty good baseline, a pretty good floor for what this team, what kind of coaching this football team is going to get. And I'll be honest, there's a couple guys in this defensive staff that are coaching with a little bit more fire this year than last year. Al Washington being one, mainly because honestly, Ryan, I think he just has more faith that, like, this room is bought in, and I now know the players and know the system, and that can't be disputed more. And we'll talk more about that here in a second. But I think the coaching aspect, you can't ignore that. We go into the season, it's a known. We know what it is. We know what the floor is, and we saw what it can do last year when it goes well.
Experience and trust matters in any circle, right? I mean, it really does. And it's easier for players to buy into a coach when they've been there for multiple years
Mhm.
and they have more time with them. I mean, naturally. And I also think it goes both ways, though, right? Is that as a coach, you're also getting more trust in the players and knowing what they can and can't do and what they can handle and what they can't handle. And so I think that relationship is very beneficial to both sides. I think that both sides have learned about each other greatly. Like the defensive line room, you found out who was going to buy in, you found out who wasn't going to buy in. And some of those guys are gone, obviously, at this point. And the ones that did buy in are still around. So the linebackers, I think you're going to take a natural maturation from year one to year two, just because the expectations are the same, right? Like, what to expect now from Al Golden, from a day-to-day process perspective, from a defensive perspective. Just the expectations are more well known. And then everyone, natural maturation on the back end as well. Another year working with Coach O'Leary in the safety room, another
So it's
year of
year
Coach
3 now,
Mickens.
right? For him,
Yeah.
year 3 for
Yep.
him, year 4 for Mike Mickens,
Yep.
right?
So all
That's
that,
your
I think
veteran
all
group
that
now.
experience and trust working together is going to take it a step forward.
Yeah,
How good it will be is a question,
yeah.
but the fact that it's going to be better and that it's going in the right direction,
Mhm.
I think you can't discount that, right?
Yeah.
It's like it'll at least be as good as it was last year, and they were a solid to good defense last year. Can they take it up to being a very good to great defense? That's the question.
Right.
I think they can, but I think they have the baseline to do it.
But that's one of the unknowns, right? Is just how good they're going to be. And that's true for a lot of people, because everybody's replacing a coach or a player or whatever from last year. And we don't truly know the ceilings of all these players. Let's dive into the surprises, though, Ryan, because I think it's a nice transition from what we were just talking about to one of the big surprises. We discussed this summer that there was a confidence with us that the defensive line was going to be pretty good. Now, how good, we still don't know, but
Sure.
I don't think you and I were in the group of people really freaking out about the defense. We felt the transition of Riley Mills inside was going to work out. We liked what we saw from Howard Cross. We knew the young players were going to be a year older. Jordan Pizarro showed what he can do. I was on a spot on Sunday, and the guys asked me, hey, you lost a lot from your defensive line last year. How are they going to replace them? And I was like, well, the good news is we've seen those guys already have to play a game without them, right? And
Right.
Riley Mills and Jordan Pizarro combined for 3.5 sacks in that game when they had to replace Adamiola and Foskey. But I'll still say this, even with the fact that you and I had a higher expectation for the D-line than maybe others, I'm still surprised at how well the defensive line has played, especially inside. I mean, Ryan, we were talking about this. Was it you that I was on the show with and said, if Notre Dame had to start Gabriel Rubio and Jason Onye this year, there's a lot of teams on their schedule that would love to have that duo as their starting lineup, and that's their twos.
Yep.
If Notre Dame lines up tomorrow, their second team defensive line could be Gabriel Rubio, a former top 100 recruit, Jason Onye, who's got as high of a ceiling as anybody they have on the inside, Javante Jean-Baptiste or Nana Osafo-Mensah, and then Josh Burnham or Junior Tuihalamaka. That's their second group. That's better than a lot of starting defensive lines that Notre Dame is going to face this year. And then you get into, there's also Donovan Heinisch, who's looked really good this fall. Get Aiden Keanaaina, who's had a really nice fall camp. He's healthy. He's looking quicker. He's in better shape. He's always going to be a big kid, but it's proportioned a little better this year than maybe it has in the past because of how hard he's had to work to get back from the knee injury he suffered, the spring before last. And you're not even getting to Armel Mukam and some of the newcomers. Tyson Ford, I haven't talked about Tyson Ford, who can play end and inside. The depth and the athleticism of the Notre Dame starting lineup, and Riley Mills, who's a guy that Notre Dame fans love to bang on for some reason. I know we're not in that category, but he was on Bruce Feldman's freaks list at number 10. He was on it last year. And what he said here's what he said about Mills. He benched 450 pounds, did 225 reps on the bench 30 times, squatted 635 pounds, hit a 20.64 on the GPS, which was up from 19 last year. Vertical jumped almost 33 inches and did 31 pull-ups at 306 pounds. He was the number 10 freak on that list. And he's played really well from what we've seen in fall camp. But it's not even like Riley's going off every day and he's just carrying the rest of the group. It's like some days it's Rubio's balling. Some days it's Onye balling. So, as far as like just really making the most plays. But every single day that we've seen them, that group has played really good football. And they play with a lot of attitude. I mean, Ryan, it is just nonstop barking at the other side of the ball. But it's done in a way where it's like not that false enthusiasm. It's just, man, we're out here to compete with you every single day. Everybody talks about how good you are as an offensive line. Well, hey, we're going to show you that we're every bit as good and better. And that's the attitude that they play with. And they're fun to watch. And you see how Al Washington acts, and you can see, they're pretty much adopting that fire that he comes at them with every single day. And I've been really impressed with what I've seen from, really the entire group. Donovan Heinisch was in that scrimmage we saw was balling out. He was getting in the backfield 2-3 times in the reps he was in there. It just didn't matter who they put in the game, Ryan. And there were times they put in the second string off defensive line against the first team offensive line, and they were still whooping the offense's butt, right? And so it's like you start getting like, man, this group's got a chance to be really good if they can carry it into the season, right? That's something we got to see. But man, they were impressive to see in fall camp, Ryan. They really were.
I think that one of the biggest improvements that Notre Dame made at this offseason, or just in general for the last couple of years, is you need to get bigger and more impactful inside. Like you needed to improve both those areas. And immediately, I even think back to the spring, but especially the fall. You saw some of the weights on the roster and you're like, oh, okay, I don't know where this exactly came from, but this is interesting. You talk about Riley Mills being 306 pounds, but Gabriel Rubio's 300 pounds. Jason Onye is over 290 pounds now. You got, you got the couple incoming freshmen like Devin Houston's over 280 pounds. You got Armand
He's
Mukum at
over
280
290 now.
pounds.
Devin Houston's
Yeah.
over 290 now. Yeah.
So you got some size and some productive size, which I think is the biggest thing. And again, we haven't seen it in a game, right? I'm not ready to crown out Washington yet, but the fact that you have seen the offseason breakout of a Jason Onye, for instance, like that tells me that kid's been coached up so far. That tells me that there's been something that's gotten through to him. Gabriel Rubio, early on in the season last year, struggled a little bit. Down the course of the season, he looked like he turned himself into a good, solid contributor at nose tackle. Well, this offseason, looks like he could be better than that. He does. And honestly, some of the numbers that Riley Mills had, because athleticism has never been the thing with Riley, right? It's been consistency. There was a play last year when he was playing big end where he had to change direction at 290 something pounds. And I was like, that's not an easy thing for him to do. And he just made it look like it was very
Was
easy,
that the sack against Carolina?
May have been. Yeah. There was just one.
Because he looped, like he jabbed and looped around and then ends up sacking Drake May.
I think so. I just remember there was a play where he kind of was going inside. His body was kind of positioned on an inside track, and then he completely changed his body direction, was able to finish for a quarterback sack. And I'm like, or maybe just a pressure. I forget what it was, but it was not an ordinary thing. Like 290 plus pounders don't move like that. And the fact that you're hearing now at 306 pounds that his athleticism and explosiveness has maybe taken a step forward, it's like, dang, dude, because you're seeing the clips of him at practice. You're reading, obviously, your practice reports about Riley at practice and how just disruptive he's been. And then you hear about the gains that he's making from a training perspective. And you're like, that all matches, man. That all matches. And if Riley Mills is that type of dude on top of Jason Onye taking a step forward, on top of Gabriel Rubio taking a step forward, on top of now a Howard Cross, who was the most known commodity in the room, but also is gotten himself a little bit bigger, and he's been an impactful player in the snaps that he's gotten during his career as well. That defensive line, interior defensive line, though, more than anything, has went from a room that I had major question marks coming out of last season, especially with Jason Adamalola not living up to what we thought he could be and then leaving, and Chris Smith, who was a solid contributor for Notre Dame. You had a couple defections from the interior defensive line from last year, but by all accounts, it's been several guys that have stepped forward and taken that next step. And if it's translating into the season, then you feel really good about where you could be, because everyone likes to bag. I know the Ohio State game, right, Brian, where they got worn down in the fourth quarter against the run. Everyone talks about the linebackers, right? But the defensive line was also getting pushed around a little bit, man. Like, let's not just act like this is just a linebacker issue.
Who were the two best players for Notre Dame that day on the D-line? It's Howard Cross and Riley Mills.
Yeah.
And they had the two best games. Howard Cross especially, I thought was very good that game.
He was.
But, yeah, I mean, it was your veteran. It was Foskey that got pushed around. It was Adamiola that got pushed around. It was like that's the guys you didn't expect to get pushed around, and they were getting up to the line. To your point, that allowed the guards to get up to the linebackers. And that was obviously a concern. My big concern with the D-line, Ryan, is when it's always when you see big weight gains across the board, you're like, okay, are they focusing on size and power and losing the speed, right? Because, Al Golden likes to use his guys to kind of, hit and kind of stay and eat up space. And are they just putting this weight on to have those guys do that? And then you watch them run, you're like, nope, they didn't sacrifice any athleticism at all. And in fact, to your point, they're a little quicker than they were in the spring. Like even Onye was noticeably quicker. Mills was noticeably quicker inside. I mean, and I was really worried about Howard Cross because he put on almost like over 10 pounds since last season. And he's listed at 288 now. And he's like, no, still quick, still disruptive. And you like to see it, man. But it's been a surprise. Another surprise for me, and it shouldn't be, it's not so much that he looks good as how quickly he looks good. Christian Gray, after the injury he had in the spring, the time he missed with the meniscus and all those type of things, how quickly he's been able to kind of get up to speed and really impress at a position that's a position, Ryan, that's hard to impress if you're a rookie because of how good it already is. Christian Gray's been a little surprise for me. And then, of course, he capped it off with a great scrimmage period a couple weeks ago. I mean, he was shutting down Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Thomas, Matt Salerno. It just didn't matter who they threw at him. The only catch they had on him was a touchdown in a goal line drill that literally required Matt Salerno to make a one-handed catch and barely get his feet in. I mean, it required a perfect throw and catch, and that's exactly what they did. And you say, if you're going to get beat, that's how you want to get beat, right? Where you did everything right. It just required perfection from the other side, and that's what they did. He's been an impressive guy to me as well. I mean, I would say this, it's not so much a surprise, Ryan, but more confirmation is the freshman class athletically, because we don't know what kind of football players are going to be yet, but athletically, the freshman class is even better than I expected it to be. Brennan Vernon's more athletic than I thought. Christian Gray's even more explosive than I thought. Adon Schuler is more smooth and fluid than I thought he was going to be. I mean, we knew he was kind of a downhill, thumper kind of kid. He's real smooth and fluid. Jaden Osbury and Drake Bowen are studs. You look at Brendan, did I say Brendan Vernon already? He looks great. Boubacar Traore has really shown me some twitchiness. Like, when I heard they were lining him up at Viper, I was like, give me a break. Seriously, why are we wasting this kid's time at Viper? And then you watch him, you're like, yeah, he still may outgrow that position, but I see the burst. Like, the twitchiness is there. I've really been impressed with the athleticism of the freshman class. That's been noticeable. I mean, noticeable on this football team when you watch those kids run around. And they do it with really good size. I mean, Drake Bowen's their biggest linebacker right now with Nolan Ziegler out. I mean, Jaden Osbury's up to a legit. Vince and I were talking about this when Jaden ran by us at a practice. We're like, yo, he's filled out a lot since the spring, and he's still smooth and explosive. He's up to legit 225 now, Ryan, and every bit as smooth and quick and as explosive as he was, because it's all like in his butt and his thighs and his. I mean, like, you can tell like that part of his body's just kind of, that's where the weights come from. And it's resulted in him being even more explosive. So that's been, I wouldn't say surprise, but an encouraging thing to see this spring has been that from that group.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there were some players in the freshman class that we expected, obviously, to be able to come in and help you. I mean, even if you go over to the offensive side of football, you can put guys like Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores in this conversation, but I don't like making declarations of players before they've played a single snap for the University of Notre Dame. But I'm ready to say that Christian Gray is going to be a stud at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I'm ready to say it. I am. I mean, when you have the athleticism that the kid has, when you have the technique and the nuance that he had, because that was the most impressive thing about his film when he was coming out of high school, was at the Smet, he was incredibly intelligent cornerback, right? Like, played with great technique. And then the fact that he's a explosive athlete, you put all that stuff together, you're just like, yep, he's going to be really good. I mean, here's a hot take, I guess. There's a chance, and just follow me, people out there, with this one for a second, all right? There's a chance that after Cam Hart leaves, if Christian Gray takes that usual freshman to sophomore year jump, the quarterback group in 2024 starters might be better than 2023, which is just wild to think about. Like, it could happen, guys. It could happen. I'm not trying to put too much pressure on Christian Gray, but like, he's been that eye-opening so far in his Notre Dame career as a practice player. Like, he looks like he is going to be a dude. Why did Ohio State and LSU and USC want this kid so bad? We're seeing it very early on that he's a legitimate, really good football player, man. There's no doubt.
Let's wrap up this section, Ryan, with sort of the things on defense that are still unknowns. And there aren't a lot on defense specifically. Now, the big picture unknown, you've addressed it already. We talked about it. How good will this defense be? That's still a question mark, right? Like, I fully anticipate this being a top 20 defense. The question is, will it be 20? Or will it be 13? Will it be 8? Will it be 5? Those are all things that we don't know yet. It's going to be better, in my opinion, than what we saw last year. I have no doubt about that. I thought that was going to be the case coming into fall camp. It's been confirmed with what we've seen so far. You feel good about where this defense is trending. How good? That remains to be seen. So that's a bit of an unknown. Will it be championship level? That's the question that still remains on both sides of the ball. Is it's going to be better, but better from 8-4? That doesn't mean that it's going to be better to 11-1, 12-0. That's still a bit of a question mark. But that side of the ball, I have more confidence in right now of it being a known than I do on offense, even though the offense has an incredibly high ceiling, high upside. Another one, so then we get into the specifics, Ryan, and there's two for me. The first one is the defensive end position and the pass rush. A lot of the pass rush we've seen this spring has really come up the middle or from blitzes. And when we've seen the defensive ends getting pressures, it's been the backups. It's been Burnham. It's been Traore. It's been those kind of guys, primarily because of the little amount of pure pass game stuff we've seen. Even the scrimmage we saw, you could tell there was definitely an emphasis on trying to get the run game going, the one that we saw at the high school last week.
So we haven't really seen this team turn it loose on the edge. So it still remains a question mark for me, even though we saw Josh Burnham look great in the scrimmage. We saw Traore. They were doing it against like Ty Chan, Emil Wagner. They weren't doing it against Blake Fisher and Joe Alt. So it's still a little bit of a question for me because we've seen so little of these guys really being turned loose in the few practices we've seen. It's just one of the byproducts of the specific things that we've seen from this group. Athletically, they look good, but to me, that edge pass rush to me is still a big question mark. Where is it going to come from? Will it be consistent? You know, we know who the contenders are, but will Botelho be able to do it week after week, series after series? Will Burnham and Tuihalamaka be able to do it when the lights are bright? What are we going to get from Javonte Jean-Baptiste? What, can Nana provide any pass rush off the edge? That to me is still a big question mark at this point in time.
And the tough part was that it was last year as well. Even with Isaiah Foskey, the consistency of outside pass rushers was not great last year. I mean, from the great games Isaiah Foskey would have, you would also disappear for a couple games. I mean, that's kind of where you were. And if you weren't getting a rush from Foskey last year, there wasn't a consistent guy to really turn to until you got to that last game of the season where Jordan Botelho balled out and had 2 sacks and 10 hurries. Like you didn't really have a game like
Riley
that.
Mills had a sack and a half, when he moved inside, right.
Yeah. So, I mean, you really, the big end position was one that you just didn't get enough production from last year. And then the guys that you're most excited about, the Jordan Botelhos, the Joshua Burnhams of the world, incredibly talented, but they haven't proven that they could be the guy in a system yet. Like they haven't proven it. Even Jordan Botelho, it's like, in a situation, in one game, he could be that guy. There's no question. But can he be the guy for 10 plus games? I have no idea if he could be that guy. If he can be, you're talking about a stellar defense potentially. Stellar. But right now, I mean, Javonte Jean-Baptiste was a part-time player at Ohio State. Productive when he needed it, but part-time. Jordan Botelho was a part-time player for Notre Dame last year. Productive when they needed it, but still part-time. You have options, but you always talk about turning potential into production. Well, is that going to happen this year is my biggest question.
The talent's there. There's no debating that. It's just, will it turn into that regularly? Because to your point, Ryan, is at times Isaiah Foskey last year looked like a first, second round pick. At times last year, he looked like a guy that just like, what is he doing in this game? The other one for me is, I think safety play has been good this fall camp. I've liked what I've seen from it. I would actually even consider it somewhat of a surprise because of how steady it's been. But we still haven't seen a ton of ball production from the safety position. Part of it, again, by the nature of what we've seen in practices. We just haven't seen them in those instances a lot. So it remains a question mark if the safety group can still be a more productive unit in the pass game. Talent is there, but it's still a question mark at this point in time how this group is going to be.
I think there's 2 layers to good safety play to determine it for me. One is the baseline is you don't give a lot of stuff up, right? At the end of the day, you are the last line of defense. You don't want to give things up, right? I think Notre Dame can do that. I don't imagine there's going to be a lot of big plays given up down the field and a lot of explosive plays. But the difference between good and great production is, can you make difference-making plays, right? And not just not let things up. And we have no idea. What did you say before? There were 6 pass breakups or something like that last year? 7?
From the safety position,
It's 7 in 13 games. Like, that's not a good
really
number.
bad.
That's really bad number.
And Harrison Smith doubled that up one year by himself in 2010.
I was going to say, if you see some of the better safeties in college football, like the Cameron Kitchens of the world out of Miami, for instance, they have that production by themselves. Like they have it by themselves. Like that's just kind of where you are. So you need to find those playmakers. I think that they are going to be in a better spot because I am a believer in Xavier Watts. I am a believer that it is at least going to be good. Is it going to be great though? Have no idea. You need it to be great.
He's been very good so far, but yes, to your point, when you see it in games, I haven't seen a lot of DJ Brown. I know he's playing. I just haven't. I can't watch everybody. I just haven't seen him. Ramon Henderson's had a solid fall camp. He really has. Coverage. He's got out of gets beat a couple times. It's going to happen, but he's been solid at other times. We need to see it in Saturdays. It's just I haven't seen enough in fall camp to be able to definitively pound on the table and say, "Yep, they've turned the corner. They're going to be great." We still need to see it. Those are the two
And
big questions.
You need to find who those difference makers different makers are as well. Because
Right.
I mean, DJ Brown might just be one of those guys where if he's not letting a lot up, that's good enough for
Right.
what you expect for
Right.
DJ. But like, can Xavier, can Ramon, can a freshman, can they be a difference maker that's going to create a big turnover?
Because it doesn't have to your point, it doesn't have to be every guy, Ryan.
Exactly.
If, like you said, if DJ Brown just tackles better and does his job, don't give up that occasional big play. That's all you need from DJ. Let Ramon and Xavier be the ball production guys. Antonio Carter can come in and be a run thumper. They don't need him to be necessarily a guy that goes out there and makes a ton of plays on the ball in his first year. So it doesn't have to be every guy. The unit has to give you more, and that's what we need to see from that group. This last segment, Ryan, I want to just kind of quickly get into this, and it's going to be essentially looking at this team, and we'll get into more predictions and things along those lines here in the next couple days. But let's talk about three things that we need to see from this football team, in our opinion, that are going to allow them to reach their full potential, and then a few things that could be the stumbling blocks. So let's begin, Ryan, with if Notre Dame is a college football playoff team, and by that we don't mean just a team that gets in because they happen to get through their schedule, but a team that gets in and can do damage, then it will be because of these three things. It'll be because of this. I'll let you start.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is create explosive plays. Like, that is what my biggest one. And that's not only just a pass game thing, because I know people just think of, just creating explosive plays vertically as a passing game. I'm talking about after catch opportunities. I'm talking about in the run game, creating some explosive plays. Notre Dame had a very small margin for error last year because they didn't have a guy that could just take the top off consistently and create a big play when offense wasn't going well. They didn't have that guy. And you need a couple of those guys to step forward, whether it is Tobias Merriweather, Deion Colsey at times, Holden Stace at tight end, whether it is Jeremiah Love at running back or Jadarian Price. You need some guys that can make offenses right when things aren't going well. And I don't think you had enough of that last year. So for me, I think that it is really creating explosive plays that is going to be big time. Not shooting yourself in the foot offensively is another big thing for me. Sam Hartman at times in his career has had some turnover issues. It has happened.
He's had those games where it comes in bulk. You are correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Aldrich Estime in his season of extreme playing time last year had a stretch where he was turning the football over. He seemed to fix that by the end of the season, but you can't shoot yourself in the foot, man. I think Notre Dame is going to be a really good offensive team. The biggest detriment that you could have to your offense is yourself at this point, in my opinion, killing yourself, right? So I think that for me, not shooting yourself in the foot, not turning the football over is a big time. And then I really think just the outside receivers taking a step forward is the biggest thing. I expect quarterbacks are really good. I expect the offensive line to gel and to be a really good unit when it's all said and done. I expect the running backs to be really good at the end of the day. Wide receiver is one that I think could be really good, or it could be average. And you need to be better than average because you have a 6-year quarterback who's been highly productive, and you need some guys to step up. So step up outside, create explosive plays as an offense in general, and don't turn the football over. If you do those three things, I think this offense has a chance to be excellent.
We have some similarities there. My three are this. Number one is Marcus Freeman has worked hard to establish an identity of physicality, toughness, intensity, passion, those type of things, words that he uses. And I almost wanted to text him the other day and be like, dude, you completely stole my thunder, because I had a story set to go out that day that we had the press conference after the scrimmage, and I was going to talk about the physicality and the passion with which this team was playing. And then, of course, he says it, and I was like, well, now I got to put the quote in there. They're going to think I'm ripping off his idea. But the reason I'm saying that is not because I had this wonderful idea. It's because it was so noticeable in practice that this team was really physical. And again, I can't compare it to where they were in fall camp last year, but I can compare what they showed in games last year. And I've asked you this, I've asked other people this that were at fall camp last year, and they're like, no, it wasn't like this last year. It was not this intense, this physical. There was a lot of competition in the way that they structured practice, but there wasn't the same type of competition, right? Between the two sides of the ball. And so part of that is if you're going to be the team that becomes your identity, it has to manifest itself in how you play in the trenches. And to me, Notre Dame cannot be a championship contending team if they do not put a great product on the field in the trenches on both sides of the ball. That means you go out to when you play Ohio State last year, the fact of the matter is, Ryan, Ohio State whooped Notre Dame in the trenches last year. Just it wasn't the skill. I mean, C.J. Stroud made some brilliant throws, money throws in that game, but they didn't have 400 yards of offense, which for Ohio State is very low. They scored 21 points. They won that game because they shut Notre Dame down in the run game. They didn't give Tyler Buckner time to throw the football. And because when the game was on the line, they wore Notre Dame out. Now, it wasn't whooped them like ran for 300 yards, but it's just when the game was on the line, their big boys stepped up and made plays, and Notre Dame's didn't. Same against USC, right? Your lines on both sides of the ball did not play the way they need to play if you're going to win that kind of game when you go on the road. They simply did not. Now, they did against Clemson, but you went 1 of 3 in the big games. We saw the defense we saw the trenches not be what it needed to be against Marshall. It wasn't what it needed to be against Stanford. Now, I don't think that they were the reason they lost either one of those games, but they were factors where they just couldn't say, it doesn't matter how bad the quarterback and everybody else is playing. We're just going to ride these big boys to victory like they did against Clemson. Wasn't like that. And when you think of the great Notre Dame teams, even under Brian Kelly, they were teams that in the trenches could go toe-to-toe with just about anybody, if not anybody. And that's what Notre Dame needs to be. There's no way this football team can go into this season and play to its potential because they outskill everyone. That's never been true at Notre Dame. Now, I'll get to that point here in a second, but the reality is they are better on the skill positions now than they've been in a long time across the board, but that doesn't matter. You still cannot be a championship contending team at the University of Notre Dame if you are not the baddest boys on the field on both sides of the ball. The potential's there, but can they be that? That we don't know. But if this team does reach its potential at the end of the year, Ryan, that's the first thing we're going to point to is say, boy, these are some bad boys now. Like, you may beat Notre Dame in the playoff. This will be our preview. This team may be able to beat Notre Dame, but I promise you're coming out of that fight with a limp, right? Like you may eventually get me in a fight, but I promise you're going to come out of that sucker hurting. And that's what the great Notre Dame teams were back in the day under Lou Holt. It's like Notre Dame didn't win all their games, but when it was a big game, if they didn't lose it, I promise you were limping out of that fight. You were going to be hurting. And that's what Notre Dame needs to be. That's what this football team needs to be. We're seeing it in practice so far. We're seeing this team that competes in their heart. They fight hard. They've put on a lot of weight, still explosive, still athletically, all those kind of things. At the end of the day, it's going to be the trench warfare that determines whether or not this football team can compete for a championship. It's not alone. It's not alone, though, Ryan, because if it was, then they would have won a championship in 2017, right? I mean, it's got to be more than that. And number 2 is you've got to get big time production on the outside. Now, I'm not talking about 4,500 yards passing and 40 touchdowns. I don't need somebody to be the next Will Fuller. At the end of the day, these receivers especially need to be able to step up and make plays. Again, I don't need them to be LSU 2019. They don't need to be that. But Sam Hartman, I was watching some film last night because, ESPN had a report where some nutty coach said something like, Sam Hartman can't drop back and throw the football. And I was just like, okay, I had to remind myself. So I was watching some All 22 last night, and I almost just out of spite, put a little cut up video together, him just dropping back and throwing the football, right? And throw. But you just get reminded of like, this guy's going to put the ball up or his receiver is going to have to go compete for the football. And I mean that in a good way. He's going to give you a chance. He's not going to wait for you to be wide open. If you're one-on-one, he's going to give you a chance to go make a play. They're going to need to make it. He's going to put the ball into some tight spots. They need to make those catches, not hit off their shoulder pads and go up and get picked off like we saw happen to him at times at Wake Forest, right? If they're going to beat Ohio State and beat Clemson and beat USC or even go 2-1 against those games, the trench has got to be great. But what was it about that 88 team, that 93 team is? Yes, the trenches were great, but in 88, Rocket was making plays. Ricky Waters was making plays. Mark Green would go off one game. They were, in 93, again, it was, Lee Becton 1 week, Ray Zellers the next week, the receivers the next week. Your skill players have to step up and make plays. And if Notre Dame is going to get to that level, the receiving core needs to be what we hope it can be. And again, that doesn't mean it's going to look like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson from 2019. It's not what I'm asking it to be. Doesn't need to look like T. Higgins and Justin Ross from 2018. Doesn't have to be that because this team's going to be better in some other areas, right? But you have to be able to step up and produce, but you got to be clutch. That's the big thing for me. They've got to be able to step up in those big games, and it's 3rd and 5. Ryan, who's going to step up and make this play? Who's going to be that guy? And, we saw it with Ohio State last year. Once Marvin Harrison went down, the game was on the line, nobody stepped up and made that play. Notre Dame's going to need those guys. And it doesn't have to be the same guy every week, Ryan. That's the thing, is it can be one week it can be Mitchell Evans. The next week it can be Holden Stace. The next week it's Tobias. The next week it's Tyree. The next week it's Deion Colsey. The next week it's Jaden Thomas. I don't care. They just, as a group, need to step up and make plays. That's going to be a big thing for me. And then the last part for me, Ryan, is the coordinators. Notre Dame cannot be a championship caliber football team if their coordinators are not big stories at the end of the year, where you're like, well, just chalk it up to, what I'm hoping for in a year from now is that Notre Dame fans are complaining about, gosh, I hope we don't lose Al Golden to the NFL now, right? Like, it's going to happen if this team is that level. Boy, look what he did, right? And now the NFL's come and calling, and now the fans that wanted him out after this past season are like, oh man, that's a big loss. And I'm going to take a shot at Notre Dame fans, because we should always have our opinions formed by what we see. So if a guy that I wanted fired last year does a great job, then I'm okay with people saying, I hope he doesn't leave. But it's going to have to be that kind of thing, right? You're just not going to out-talent everyone on your schedule. Notre Dame's roster has come a long way, especially in the last couple of years. But it's not to the point, Ryan, where they can just line up and out-talent Georgia every snap. Sure. And at every position. Or they can do that to Bama or Ohio State or even to Clemson. You're going to need to put your guys in position to maximize their potential. We need to see that from Al Golden. We need to see that from Jared Parker. So to me, at the end of the year, if those two coaches are guys we're talking about as fan favorites, then I think that's also something that's needed, because that encompasses a lot of different things. It means, that they were good at situational football. It's a big part of being a championship football team. You got to be good in 3rd down. You got to be good coming out. You got to be good coming out of the half. You got to be good in red zone, at on offense, and then making stops in those situations. You got to be able to create big plays. You got to be able to limit big plays. You got to limit turnovers on offense. You got to force turnovers on defense, right? Coordinators have to be part of that. You just can't go out there and do it on talent. Yeah, it's also part about putting those guys in position to be successful. We've rarely seen a team. I mean, the only one I can think of in my lifetime where I thought they won in spite of coaching was Miami in 2021 or 2001. But they had been coached prior to that season, but they were just so talented it didn't matter. Like, the coaching wasn't going to stop that team. But the next year, after they had lost Ed Reed and some guys, they got out-coached in the championship game by Ohio State. They did, even though they had the better football team or talent-wise. So at 45 years old, I've seen it once where a team was just so talented they just go out every week and just out-talent everyone. Haven't seen it other than that. So you've got to have good coaching, and I'm excited about the potential of this group, but I just don't think they can be that unit, Ryan, that kind of football team if their coordinators aren't storylines by the end of the year. They're going to need them to thrive. And they're going to be going up against some of the best minds in the game, especially Al Golden. I mean, you're going up against Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day in the same season.
Yep.
You're going against Jeff Brom, right? I mean, you're going against some of the best. You're going against Warren Ruggiero and Dave Clawson at Wake Forest. Say whatever you want about them. They are really good offensive minds.
Okay.
So, you're going against Robert and I this season. Like, the schedule is loaded with really, really good offensive minds, which means Al Golden and his staff need to be on top of their game. And defensively, you don't see quite as much of that. But in some of Jim Knowles is a really good defensive coordinator, right? Tony Gibson's one of the 10 best defensive coordinators in college football, in my opinion. I don't know what your thoughts are on Tony Gibson, but just as far as scheming and coaching and getting the most out of the talent he has, to me, he's one of the 10 best coordinators in college football. I've been a big fan of his, even going back to his West Virginia days, right? And so he's a guy that I like. So there's some guys like that on defense as well, but offensively, Al Golden is going to face a lot of really great offensive minds, which means he has to get his kids ready to play and be able to kind of do the mental battle with those coaches. Because that's my favorite part, Ryan, is the mental battle, the chess match. Yep. I did this to set this up and this created this. And, it's one of my favorite highlights of the Broncos Super Bowl in 33 Super Bowl. I'm sure you've seen it, where the whole defensive series, that next series, you've got Mike Shanahan and Gary Kubiak going over what they saw and they could run that bootleg post to Rod Smith. They just spent the whole series designing that play because they saw something from Eugene Robinson, who picked Elway off the year before, right, with the Packers, now with the Falcons. And they said, hey, we know what he's going to do, and you're just spending that whole – it's that chess match, right? And last year, Notre Dame couldn't always win that chess match. This year, they need to if this football team's going to maximize its potential. And so that's the final piece to me, Ryan.
Well, I think it's talent, right? I mean, because we've always pushed back on the notion that Notre Dame doesn't have talent. So if Notre Dame falls short this year, I think it's because talent wasn't maximized or talent wasn't developed properly. Right. Like those things kind of align with this. And in year 2 now of this defensive coaching staff intact, you need to take a step forward from utilizing the talent you have. Offensively, yes, you have a new offensive coordinator, but you still have a lot of offensive position coaches that kind of know what they're doing, right? I mean, even Joe Rudolph has been at this for a long time.
Yep.
Chancey Stuckey's now in his second year. Dylan McCullough has been everywhere and done that, right?
And
like
won
he's been
everywhere,
coach.
Right?
Exactly. So I think that it needs to take a step forward, because if it doesn't, then we're going to hit the same old, tired line that Notre Dame doesn't have talent. I'm just tired of hearing it. I'm tired, man, because it's not true. I watch these kids from recruits to now playing on the field. I'm just like, you can't tell me Tobias Merriweather isn't talented. You can't tell me Audric Estime isn't talented. You can't tell me Joe Walt isn't talented. You can't tell me that Jordan Patelho isn't talented, that Jason Onye isn't talented, that all these guys aren't talented. You just can't do it anymore. I mean, you just had 3 kids on the Feldman's freak list. I mean, we talked about it briefly, but like Riley Mills topped over 20 miles per hour at 306 pounds, guys.
A D tackle, a D end, and a corner. The 3 positions people keep saying, oh, Notre Dame can't recruit big time. You know what I mean? Like,
well, Brian, because everyone hyper-focused, like, oh my God, Cam Hart ran 23 miles an hour. And I'm like, that's impressive for a 200-pound corner. There's no doubt. But you know what's more impressive? A defensive tackle at 306 pounds running 20 miles an hour. That is nuts, man. Like, that's an insane number, guys. Like, I don't think we understand that. But
I'm hoping the calibrations aren't wrong, and that's the problem. You know
really, I mean? Seriously, though. I mean, but it just always comes back to, man, is that there's this big misnomer out there that Notre Dame lacks talents. No. Hasn't been developed properly in some instances and hasn't been utilized properly in other instances. There needs to be a year where both those things align. If they do align, Notre Dame has a chance to win a national championship. That's where it comes down to, right? I don't think Notre Dame is not going to not reach its potential this year because there's a lack of talent. That's all I'm saying. Like, that's not going to be why.
And a lot of that misconception is from Notre Dame fans, because they have been convinced for a decade by the head football coach that they didn't have what it takes. They were only winning because of his brilliance and not because of the players. So luckily we're past that. Ryan, we just got a few super chats I want to quickly get to before we get out of here, because I got to head over to practice. Raymond Harton says, thank you, Raymond. Thank you for super chat, Raymond. May not make all the show today, guys. Just want to show our support. Go Irish. Thank you, Raymond, very much. Rob Osgood, my man. Thank you, Rob. I have high hopes for this team. Physical speed is my biggest want. Bully teams, but also the mental side of we will dominate and beat you down. That has to be a part of the DNA of this football team. No doubt about it. Matt 2011 GT says crab money. I don't know. Is that for you, Ryan? Are we going to get some crab somewhere? Maybe when I get back in town to visit my family in Virginia Beach, I'll be going to get some. There's no doubt about that.
I don't do the crabbing thing. No.
Coffees for closers. Thank you for super chat. No question. Just showing my appreciation for what you give. Insight. Thank you for that. I appreciate that very, very, very much. Andrew Gilmore, see, what you should have there is you should buy yourself an IB mug and have your IB there in your Coffees for Closers thing. That would be awesome, but I still like that one a lot. Andrew Gilmore, any concern about Notre Dame, NC State's OC Robert Anae? I think he did a great job at Syracuse, now reunited with Armstrong. He seems like a good journeyman OC. Andrew, what I would encourage you to is to listen to our show yesterday. Listen to our breakdown of NC State, because I go into Ryan and I both have a great deal of respect for Robert Anae.
Yes.
But part of my explanation was explaining why I had NC State ranked higher on my list than others because of him. So I would encourage you to check that out. You'll get a much better sense of that as well. Truman Dumel, I haven't seen you in a while, Truman. Thank you for your super chat. He says, love the latest article, Brian D. How will our physical play and speed help us? P.S. Talk about Anthony Knapp and Riley Mills. We talked a lot about Riley Mills. We won't have a chance to get into Anthony Knapp today. But when we have our next recruiting show, I'm sure we'll have time to talk about that. Truman also says,
Is this Howard Cross draft year, hopefully, the New York Jets? Ryan technically has one more year left. I think it just depends on how this season goes for Howard before we get there. But you also addressed that, I believe, yesterday as well.
We did. Yeah, they
correct?
asked me about his draft stock. Yep.
Yeah, so I would encourage you to check that out, Truman, because we do have to run out of here pretty quickly. Wicked Bronco Production with a couple super chats. Thank you. I think Notre Dame goes 11-1 this year. The offense will be way better than last year. No more Pine throwing to only Mayer. No more Tommy Reese scheming where we play conservative. Ben Morrison Thorpe Award. And then hot takes. Hartman will be top 3 in Heisman voting. Indy goes 11-1 and plays Michigan in the semis and wins. Benjamin Morrison will have 9 INTs and hold Marvin Harrison under 100 yards and no TDs. Jane Thomas 1,000 receiving yards. Thoughts? I don't think there's any way in heck that Benjamin Morrison gets 9 interceptions this year. I don't know that he'll be thrown enough times to have that many receptions. Could he hold Marvin Harrison 100 yards? Sure, he did it last year. Him and Cam Hart did it last year. So sure, he could. Jaden Thomas 1,000 yards. That would surprise me. So the individual stuff would surprise me. The 11-1 part wouldn't, and playing Michigan in the playoff wouldn't surprise me either. I don't have Michigan in the playoff, Ryan, but it wouldn't. I mean, they've been there 2 years in a row. It wouldn't shock me if they're there, even though I don't have them predicted to go there. So any other thoughts on that, Ryan, before we get out of here?
I mean, 9 interceptions is pretty crazy, man. I think we have one more super chat that popped up, but I
Oh,
wouldn't.
there we go. Matt, 2000 GT,
Benjamin
Mr.
Morrison 9
Krabs
times
likes
this
money.
year.
It was a joke. Yes, I gotcha. Sorry. It went a little bit over my head. Sorry about that, Matt. I appreciate you, man.
Not a SpongeBob guy, apparently.
Yep. No, it's not. I don't have kids. It would just be weird if I was watching SpongeBob, I think.
Well, I watched SpongeBob when I was a kid because that's my era, but yeah.
That's true. Yeah, I was an adult when that came out. So, Ryan, why don't you go ahead and take us out of here, man?
Yep, appreciate you. Sorry for having to run so quick, but Brian's going to have an excellent practice report coming up here in a couple hours.
It's a lot of pressure,
sure you go
man.
to boards.irish, it's not pressure, boards.irishbreakdown.com, the early insight into what Notre Dame does in practice today, as well as irishbreakdown.com. We'll have some practice thoughts, obviously, later today. So before you leave,
noon again tomorrow as well for our show.
Yes.
Noon again tomorrow.
12 o'clock as well. Brian will be doing his weekly rundown and working through some questions before tomorrow's practice, as well as a little bit of later in the day. So before you leave, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, and hit that notification bell, especially if you are very forgetful about scheduling changes. Make sure you hit that notification bell, and we will see you all very shortly again on the Irish Breakdown podcast.